Hello again and welcome to the Changeville podcast. It's me, Brandon, one of the directors of the Changeville Festival. I don't know if you saw it, but we just recently dropped the second wave of our music festival lineup, which includes the band Cracker, the Savants of Soul, Flip Turn, Guts, Pearl and the Oysters, Retro Lux, Wester Joseph's, Stereo Voodoo, Wax Wings, In Bed by 10, and Mike, Lorena, and The Nerve. We've got lots more announcements coming your way, but for now, what you're here to hear is an interview with Ian Harvie. On this podcast, we talk to artists using their work to drive social change, and Ian is one of our comedians performing at Changeville 2018 during our comedy showcase. He and Liz Winstead are going to hold it down, and honestly, it's going to be one of the funniest nights in Gainesville all year long. I highly recommend you check out Ian Harvie's TED Talk if you haven't already. Ian made his acting debut as Dale in the critically acclaimed Golden Globe and Emmy Award-winning TV series Transparent on Amazon. You may have seen him also as Michael on the ABC soapy nighttime drama Mistresses, or even as Chris on Freeform's sitcom Young and Hungry. He's also been on The Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore. Long story short, Ian Harvie is the real deal, and I think that he's going to do a better justice talking about what it is that he does than me listing out his accolades. So without further ado, here's Jennifer Vito talking to Ian Harvie for the Changeville podcast.
All right. Well, hello, Ian Harvie, and thanks so much for being on the Changeville podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you perform at the Changeville Festival.
I was so excited to be asked. First of all, I didn't know about Changeville until I was asked, and then I was like, how cool that they're doing this in, I don't know, what do you call Gainesville? Is it Central Florida or?
Yeah, North Central Florida. We also call it the liberal bubble, the green bubble.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Well, there's a college here, and I would say it's one of the raddest cities in Florida.
Awesome. Well, I've been to that college before because I had a friend who taught there years ago. I don't think he does anymore. But I remember going to campus. It was huge. So I can understand that and why it might be, considered a blueberry in a sea of strawberries.
Yes. And having the college and all the startup companies, I think, helps keep it kind of progressive here.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm so glad.
Yeah. Well, let's start a few years back. You opened for Margaret Cho from 2006 to 2009. Were you on the road for 3 years constantly with Margaret Cho?
I wouldn't say constantly, but every show that she went out and did, I went out and did with her. So she handpicks her openers, and I had met her and at a gig that we were both working out new material on the east side of LA at this little gay bar, and that her friend had a little show there, and she was doing a set, working on some new material up there with her notebook, and I went up and said hi afterwards, and she invited me to a show, and then at Largo, which, if you're not familiar, it's probably LA's best comedy venue in the entire LA area. And so anyway, she asked me, she's like, hey, come to this show. And when I arrived there, she's like, you're going to go out and do 5 minutes. I'm like, what? I literally say I'm pretty certain I shirt in my pants when she said you're gonna go up, because she was iconic even then. I mean, she was iconic long before that. And to meet her and to have her ask me to come there and then to have her say do a set, I just was blown away.
Oh, well, luckily you were already a stand-up comedian, so you had a set prepared.
Yeah, well, I mean, she wouldn't have asked me otherwise, I mean, that would have been crazy. But she was very generous with her, spirit of trying to help elevate maybe a voice that hadn't been heard yet of a trans person in comedy. So she was really, really gracious with her time and letting me open for her and putting me to work and letting me do long sets where I could practice long sets and get better and better and better. So, and I owe so much to her for letting me do that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Had you done a lot of touring on your own before that?
Before that, so I moved to Los Angeles in May, June. I'm trying to think. I probably arrived in June of 2006. So I had packed up my car in May and left and drove cross country and stopped at comedy clubs across the country before coming to LA to move here. So I spent 5 weeks on the road. And then I got here, and I met Margaret a few months later, and that's when that happened. So the next 3 years, so my touring, in quotation marks, before that was regionally in the Northeast, where I grew up and where I started doing stand-up, like Portland, Maine, Boston, and, various places around Massachusetts. And so my touring was really limited before that. I hadn't been around the world like what Margaret did with me. So, or actually I should say I did with her. But, but after that, it sort of gave me a platform and a voice and a little bit of an audience that I had built through her audience, to be quite frank. And I started doing things like I went to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival in Australia, and have since been over, screened my stand-up film in Europe and traveled all over the U.S. and comedy clubs and small theaters and colleges. And so what I did with her helped me build enough time to actually be a headliner. And so when she and I parted ways on the touring together thing, we're still great friends. She's one of my best friends. She allowed me to have enough time to actually become a headliner. So I wouldn't be where I'm at without her having given me the time.
Yeah, that's great. And I know touring is a great bonding experience. There's also a lot of downtime when you're on the road. Is that when you all started working on your comedy special, or did you do some writing together? What did you do in the downtime?
In the downtime, there was one time when we were in Birmingham, Alabama, and we went to the Civil Rights Museum. A lot of times, we worked off Broadway together for 9 weeks, and we had meals together and rehearsals together. And there was times we would hear about a particular thing that would be cool to see in that local community. Well, we were in Australia, and we went and saw the wallabies, and we went and saw koalas, and went to a sanctuary. So we did do tons of fun stuff like that, but we also did write a ton of material together. There were things that happened that were undeniably hilarious, and you had to bring up on stage. Writing comedy is not this completely solo act, and people think that it's this thing that we sit quietly with our thoughts in our bedroom or whatever. We have a notebook with us at all times. Almost every comic I know either has a notebook or is texting themselves premises all the time. So when you're out with other comics, everybody's constantly trying to be funny with one another in their own way, and they come up with their own things. And so a ton of material was written on the road. And a lot of times Margaret would tag a joke of mine and say something super funny that I should say on stage, and say, use that. You should use that. And I did the very same thing with her. Even though she is at a clearly different place in her career as an iconic, female person of color comic, she is definitely at a sort of different tier, if you will, financially. But we are the same. We struggle for the same material. And so it's a very collaborative experience when you're on the road with other comics. It's not a competition. And so we wrote for each other, we wrote with each other, and we tagged each other's jokes.
Yeah, that's great. I know a lot of comedians workshop with each other and are constantly working on material together just in life, in the casual
absolutely.
setting. And then when you do that around your family and friends who aren't comedians, but you still are coming up with a lot of funny stuff, then those are automatically your jokes because they're not a comedian.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. Yeah.
So then Margaret Cho was the executive producer of your comedy special, Ian Harvie Superhero.
Yeah,
So that came after the touring together.
Yes, and she actually came and opened that show for me in Portland as a surprise to my audience. So I went home to film it, and in the theater, she came out at the beginning and did a set and introduced me, which was such an honor to have her do. And there was this weird moment. There was a technical difficulty with the camera and sound recording. And so there was this moment where I was literally about to walk on stage, and someone said, wait, there's an issue with the sound. And they said, hold on, and I'm standing side stage, and Margaret's like, do you need me to go out? And they're like, I guess. We're not sure how long that's going to take. So she goes out, and she goes back out after she had just introduced me. And this is the first time that she did it, but she continued to do it almost every night on stage after this particular night. So she had just had 2 massive tattoos done on her butt cheeks. And so in New York the day before. And so she flew up from New York. She was in LA, went to New York, flew up to Maine, has 2 massive tattoos on her ass. And she doesn't know what to do in that moment. She's like, to kill time, she's like, hey, you guys, I just got new tattoos. You guys want to see? And she took down her pants down to her knees and turned around, and she had a thong on. And there are these 2 faces. There's these sort of faces that face each other, and they're both facing the crack of her butt. And she started sort of doing like I don't know, what's the move where people like a booty clap kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar.
And yeah, and then kind of like trying to shake one side and then the other. She's like, doesn't it look like they're in conversation? And can you see the faces? And so she did that for the next like 15 minutes and just talked about her new tattoos. And anyway, so yes, she executive produced, she opened for, introduced me, and also went back out to like fill time while they were figuring out a technical difficulty, and came on one of her best bits that she does to this day.
I feel like I should interview Margaret Cho now, because I just want to know, like, did you get the tattoos knowing that would just be part of your comedy for the rest of time, or was it unrelated and it just became funny? But maybe I'll ask. You're going to answer to that.
No, I think it was unrelated, and I think she was like, well, frig, what do I do right now to, like, kill time? And she's like, I'll just tell them about my new tattoos. And just, like, dropped her leather pants to show them. And she had a thong on, so I don't think that it wasn't planned. I think that she was just like, what am I going to do? I'm just going to be real right now. Here's what happened with me recently. And so anyway.
Well, I'll ask you, what do you think came first for you? The urge to make art and be an artist, or to be an activist?
I would say activism, like as a really young, bleeding heart liberal, as a kid, wanting to, like, I remember, like, there was a kid in elementary school who came to school, and he had just the biggest holes in his Converse sneakers in the dead of winter in Maine. No socks, couldn't afford them, was very, very poor. And I went to school with a pair of boots and then would change into a pair of shoes. And I would leave my shoes there and then put my boots on and go home. A lot of kids did that. And this kid, my shoes were marked with my name in them in the inside, but this kid was very poor. His feet were cold. He stole my shoes at some point. And I saw him with them, and I never accused him. I just thought, my God, like, I don't think I thought this in these exact words, but I thought, I definitely have more than he does. I have this privilege that he doesn't, and I just couldn't bear to think of asking for those shoes back and putting that kid through a Maine winter of misery with, I don't know, I just couldn't bear to think of it. And it was probably like the first time that I had thought of someone outside of myself, which I know it sounds weird, but I don't want to say that that was activism, but it was like my first understanding of maybe my privilege.
Yeah, and it's that sort of awareness that usually leads to being an activist, doing something about it.
Yeah, so I think it always made me kind of much more aware of who was around me and making sure people were included and not excluded because of that they were different or poor or I don't know. It made me want to be more inclusive. So it was probably like my first like sliver of an intro into giving a shit about other people, not just myself. And I was probably in maybe third or fourth grade at that time. And so after that, like fast forward to post high school, I ran around with ACT UP and Queer Nation. There was a small chapter of each in Portland, Maine, and we had a lot of demonstrations against Bush Sr., who would come to town and go to Kennebunk, and we would demonstrate every time that he was in town for his deliberate, murderous negligence for people with AIDS and for mass incarceration and all kinds of things that we were bullshit at him about. But every time he came to the state of Maine, we would protest him. And so that was probably like, so my activism, honestly, I was more aware of that than I was about wanting to be an artist. Like when I was a kid, we used to put on shows for our parents and aunts and uncles. Me and my cousins would get together and put on like a theatrical show, but I would come out in the intermission and do stand-up comedy of jokes that I wrote that made no sense. But they laughed. They were a good audience. They were kind to laugh. But I didn't carry that art with me into my teens or even young 20s to think that it was something I could do and make a living off of. As an artist, like it just didn't really occur to me that could be something that could happen. So it wasn't until my late 20s, maybe 30, that someone who was like a telecommuting writer for The Daily Show and friends with Jon Stewart, that he put out a postcard for a comedy writing workshop in Portland, Maine at a local comedy club. And I was very interested in that, and I ended up taking that. And that was when it really ignited that part of me again that I remembered as a child of like wanting to be an artist, wanting to make people laugh, and it wasn't until about 2 years in that I understood that my activism and my art were going to be combined in some sort of way. So, and then when I met Margaret, I remember I was saying I was really scared to be honest about being trans on stage because I was afraid that I would be eaten alive. And she said, no, we need your representation. We need representation from all people in this art, and we need your voice. And it wasn't until that moment that I understood, like, very clearly that you know what, I didn't have to write trans-related material, but just being out on stage could be really powerful for other trans people to see. So sometimes my material is very specifically charged and about, you know, politics and transness. And sometimes it's just about telling my story and being an activist because I'm being out and proud and self-loving about who I am, and a positive voice for others to say, you know what, maybe I could do that, or maybe I could be an actor, or maybe I could be. And I think for me, I didn't realize until then too, as well, that when I was younger, I couldn't see myself as an older person because I didn't know who I was. I didn't see myself in another trans person. I had zero representation. So I think for me, it was just so important to be out and be open about who I was so that others could see themselves. That's probably my most political statement, is an activist sort of action is to be as out and self-loving as I can be.
Yeah, and just being yourself out there on that platform. And then in addition to that, art, especially comedy, is such a great vehicle for communication and change, I think.
Yeah, it's very, I agree. It's very disarming for people because they go into a comedy club to laugh. They go in and they sit down after a long day, they have a drink or not, and they just want to laugh. And so until that first moment comes where they get to laugh, like their shoulders are up by their ears. And the moment you first get them to laugh, their shoulders come down a little bit. You open them up in a way that you can't get in really many other art forms, if any.
Laughter is like a physical truth. And so if you're also incorporating some views that are more progressive into that joke that they laughed at, they sort of know that truth.
Yeah. It's very, to me, it's kind of subversive because I think something is happening to people while they're listening and laughing that they don't even realize it's happening, and that they walk away with a new perspective about transness that they didn't have before, and they go home and maybe they've learned something while they laughed, and that it didn't feel like they were learning something. They were just laughing and interested, and and then they walk away with a new perspective that they didn't have before. So I think that way it's very subversive, and it's art form. I feel like it's like a secret weapon, to disarm people and reach them and access their heart space.
Ian Harvie, superhero.
Yeah.
So do you still enjoy doing stand-up comedy at home in LA on the road? Because now you've also done a lot of writing and acting.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it will probably always be my number one love. Even though I'm loving acting and I'm loving writing and doing lots of other things, but I think for me it's the most immediate way to feel like I'm accessing people. Like if you do TV stuff, like it's filmed and put out there, and it might be a great story that you're telling, but you don't have that immediate response that, like, I know with an audience because they're right there in front of me, like if we connected, so it's like I like that immediate sort of gratification, if you will.
Yeah, that intimacy.
It is gratifying. Yeah, it's an exchange for sure. I mean, you think that comedy is kind of a solo sport, but it's not. Not in the writing of it, not in the exchange of it. Like when you tell people jokes, it's very much a give and take. So I don't know. I really like that part of it. So it will always be my number one love of art form.
And you'll be doing stand-up comedy at the Changeville show. I assume it was comedy and not Shakespeare acting or something.
Yeah.
And that'll be part of the Lady Parts Justice League show with Liz Winstead, co-creator of The Daily Show. And you're part of the Lady Parts Justice League crew, right?
Yeah, I went on tour with them this summer, and I did 8 of their 16 city tour this summer, and they're so incredible. And Liz in particular, all of them, but Liz is one of the sharpest comics I have ever met. She's so goddamn funny and so goddamn poignant. Everything that comes out of her mouth is, I just think, is on point, and I love watching her comedy, but I also love watching her activism, and I love that she and her crew that I get to, be honored to be part of Lady Parts Justice League to go out and do something for abortion care providers, for these healthcare providers that are, tortured daily by people in their states and their home states, and struggle getting to work because there's people blocking the driveway or harassing them at home, or to keep abortion legal and safe, and I worship everything that they do.
Yeah, so do we. We're big fans, and we've had Liz as part of the comedy show last year, and I got to interview them on panels. And it seems like a really fun group. Like entertainment and art is at the forefront of the activism that they're doing. Can you give us any good behind-the-scenes tour stories of bad 90s karaoke parties or anything you'd like to share?
Imagine, I don't know, six or eight of us in a extra long white van with bench seats, and talking, like everybody's thumbing through their iPhones or their phones, like for the latest, horrible headlines about Trump, writing material about that, or, I would say, sometimes occasionally by accident staying at a really horrific hotel, but also like, I'll tell you, so it felt like summer camp. If you ever went to summer camp or even adult camp for that matter, at the end of it, I didn't want to leave. I had to go do more stuff for back in LA. But I'll tell you, like, I met so many awesome people. I didn't want to get out of the van. I didn't want to go home. It was I can understand how that they can keep their level of tenacity for the fight for abortion rights, because there's so much love and fun and camaraderie and family connections in that group that I think that that's probably what keeps them so strong.
Yeah, I can relate. I love being on the road and touring. I went to punk rock summer camp this summer. I was on the Warped Tour, so
God, that's awesome.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave either. Every tour I feel like that. And then you're just bonded with those people in a special way for life, your tour mates.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with ensembles of people, whether it be in theater or comedy or Lady Parts Justice League, and not wanting to leave at the end. It just breaks my heart. Like at the end, like I'm like, I don't want to go. Even in the first 3 days, I was like, guys, I love you.
Yeah. And so we're all going to be reunited at the Changeville show.
Yes, it'll be so much fun. I can't wait.
So you've been on some shows, Transparent, Mistresses. Do you get to participate in your character's representation through consulting or being part of the writing process on those shows?
Sometimes to a large degree, and sometimes to a very minor degree. Like on Transparent, it was a very unique process because I went into the writer's room and shared my entire story with them. And a lot of the things that I shared with them hit the page of the script. So, like, when I talk about how my mother still calls me Janet, there's actually a line in the script where I talk about my mother still calls me by my birth name. Do I look like a Megan? Like, those kinds of things. It's really beautiful when your story is shared in that way and you feel like you've been heard, and maybe somebody else's story will feel similar. In Mistresses, I would say that it's a network show, and generally with network shows, you come in, you have the script, and they want you to say it how it is written, unless there was something like super offensive, which there never was. But there was a couple times where I was like, that's not really how I would say that, especially when it was pertaining to trans topics. There was maybe a couple adjustments that I asked for, and they were totally fine with it. And then Young and Hungry, I would say they were so spot on with their script that I didn't really need to comment on it. But they all vary, and I think that there's an earnestness now in the entertainment industry and writers' rooms that they really want to get the story right. And I know that it doesn't always happen that way, but it is happening more and more often. And so I'm not afraid to speak up if I've found something to be inaccurate or offensive or potentially hurtful or I think they're going to get some backlash, from in comments online and things like that. This is something that I would definitely speak up about. But I haven't really experienced that. I think I've been really fortunate. I also think that trans guy characters are fairly elusive, in that there's not a lot of storytelling about trans men, but there's some about trans women, and that because they're telling just slightly more stories about trans women, that their opportunity to get it wrong is higher. And so I think that it's been an issue predominantly for trans women that that kind of thing happens. But people are slowly just simply asking trans people, is this accurate? So I'm grateful for that, and my experience has been really great.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, and I think all of us are grateful for some of the work that telling the stories of trans people is actually helping everyone, who may have this common rejection of stereotypical gender roles and unrealistic standards and oppressions associated with all of that.
Yeah, and I just want to say that there still is a major employment issue with hiring trans people in the entertainment industry, and I think that people are generally sort of fearful that they're going to get it wrong in front of us, so they just avoid hiring us. And so, which I think is been the case with other minorities, in the past. Like, I'm not sure what to say if I'm going to screw it up, so let's just not, work with them. So I'm not, held to a higher standard of thinking and language and politics. And so I think that that's changing. I do think that that's changing. But I think that historically people have just been fearful.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's so cool for you to point that out because, you don't want to be tokenized, or you don't want to stop other people's voices from being heard because they can say, well, no, we have this one, this one woman or this one trans person or, this one person of color. So obviously we're not, being discriminating.
Yeah, I mean, I think equality is going to happen when if trans people are, I don't even know what the number we are in the population. If we are 1 in 10 human beings are trans or gender non-conforming or non-binary, if 1 in 10 exist, then 1 in 10 of your people in your production crew should be one of those people. If LGB people are 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of your people should be I think that that's when equality will happen, is that when we have equal representation in all aspects of behind the camera, in front of the camera. I was just thinking about, I worshiped soap operas when I was a kid, but there's so few people of color, there's so few gender variant people, there's so few, it's all uber masculine and uber feminine.
And certain body types and
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Across the board. TV's gotten better since I was a kid. It's not there yet though, but
no, but it is getting better. I agree.
Yeah, thanks to slightly more representation, and it's probably more like 30%, like 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. In actuality, really.
Yeah, I think that number's going up the more safe it becomes to come out.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people out there that have seen how trans women and people who are non-binary or have been treated, and they're like, hell no, I'm not doing that. So they have either waited or withheld being their authentic selves for fear of how they would be treated. But I think that number is a lot higher than we would ever really know at this point.
Yeah, it so helps to have, like you said, some representation that you could even know to identify with. You know, some of these things weren't even options that I knew about when I was growing up and struggling with stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 49. I grew up in the 70s in Maine. There was zero representation. I had no idea who I was. It took me many, many years to figure that out because I couldn't see myself. I wasn't exactly like my dad. I wasn't exactly like my mom. I saw that butch woman in town at my dad's store one day. You know, that was sort of maybe, but people spoke ill of her because she was butch, and I'm like, that's I can't be that, because, you know, so it's there's a lot of forces at work that keep us from our authentic selves, and it's lack of representation. It's people shaming other people in front of us that will block us in the long run from admitting who we are.
Yeah, for thinking that's a viable option, that's something you'd want to be.
Yeah.
So are there any other causes or organizations which you're passionate about or want to give a shout out to?
I just recently became a executive board member at Los Angeles, LA, so the LA LGBT Center. I am so passionate about all the programs that they have there specifically for homeless youth, for queer homeless youth. And they have an education program there that they have 100% success rate in getting teens, young adults, young LGBT people their GEDs. They not one of their students has failed in getting their GED. Not one test has ever been failed. They have an incredible program for LGBT people that are aging. They have elder housing. And I'm just honored to be part of this organization that is, they're building a new building that they're going to have homeless youth apartments and elder housing in the same building, so putting youth and older queers together. And I'm just honored to be part of this organization. So I'm passionate about their trans health program there. I know I'm kind of going on about this one particular place, but they're doing so much good, and I'm honored to even be part of it. I can't even believe that they asked me, and I'm kind of just in awe of all that they do. So Lady Parts Justice League, keeping abortion health care safe and legal is at the top of my list too, and I just think that body autonomy, because I want, as a trans person, I want body autonomy, and I think that having the right to do what you need to do with your body for health care reasons, for any reason, is something that should be absolute, and so that's why I do what I do with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And maybe if our listeners want to check out some of those organizations, we'll provide some links after the show. Do you feel like some of that same thinking carries over to environmental justice or animal rights? Does that influence your diet?
It does. You know what? It's funny. I'm a vegetarian as of like maybe 5-6 months ago, and I've been vegan before. I've tried that, and sometimes there's things that's it's crazy strict for me, that there's things that have animal products in it that that it's more difficult for me to sort of stay on top of all that. So, but I'm definitely vegetarian, and so yeah, it definitely has changed the way I think about lots of things. Like, it's kind of like once you crack yourself open to look at one issue, you start. If it's really difficult to not look at all of them, but it's also really difficult to be balanced about all of them, because the same as sort of resisting this current administration, it can be exhausting. So you have to kind of pace yourself, and maybe eventually I'll be vegan. But for now, I'm not doing meat products, not doing dairy. But it's really hard to be on one topic and say, okay, I'm for this and I'm not for that, and these are the things I'm going to do about it, and to not sort of apply that to lots of other places in your life. but it's also hard to keep a balance and not feel overwhelmed by it. So my suggestion to anybody who's coming up against all of these topics is to, like, be kind to yourself about it. You're not going to be perfect, and just do as much as you're able to do.
Yeah, just do what you can, one step at a time. And even,
Yeah.
I mean, even just eating vegetarian sometimes is having environmental benefits and all kinds of benefits.
Yeah, I've watched too many documentaries now about animal treatment, and I also think, like, I have my partner and we volunteer for Pug Nation Rescue Los Angeles, and we've probably had a couple dozen foster pugs in our house at over the last couple of years. And we have our own dogs, and I look at them and I'm like, can you imagine just, I don't know, keeping them in a cage and then eventually eating them? No, I can't friggin' imagine that.
Yeah, I
So
mean, the treatment that the food industry, it's not just about if you eat them at the end of the day. It's like so much more that they go through.
So it's really hard to, like, what I've been doing for so long is compartmentalizing all of that. I've been compartmentalizing how, like, oh, well, I don't treat my animals like that, but but that is happening times a million every day around the planet. So I guess, why do I hold myself exempt from that? Like, that, I don't know. I just had to start thinking of it a little bit differently, and thinking about, like, all of these critters as my animals or my friends, or how I would treat my own little, critters in my house. Like, why do I all of a sudden compartmentalize that and treat these other ones differently and enable, these people to profit off of torture? How do I reconcile that?
Yeah, well, much respect. I mean, it isn't easy. We're all socialized, most of us anyway are socialized to that it's normal, the food industry and whatnot. So
yeah,
props
it's hard.
to you.
It's a hard thing to stay on top of.
But I'm sure your fans are influenced by that, and so that's even more social justice work that you're doing just by being who you are. So let's go with a fun question. What music artists or comics are you into right now, and are there any you'd recommend we check out?
I would check. My number one favorite comic right now is also a friend of mine who I just have mad respect for, and she's so freaking funny. Her name is Jaye McBride, Jaye McBride, and I love her Twitter, and I love her stand-up in person, and I think that she's just stellar. So I would check her out. For music, you know what I'm super obsessed with right now?
What?
I'm looking up on my phone right now. Because I have it on repeat right now. It's a band called Wonder, and the song is called Lifetimes.
What is the band called?
And Wonder, O-H,
Mm-hmm.
and then Wonder. And I'm just obsessed with that. I'm also obsessed with. Did you see Girls Trip?
No, not yet.
Okay. There's a scene in Girls Trip where they're in the streets of New Orleans, and there's a marching band that is playing a song called Lovely Day, and the band is playing it while they're kind of like dancing down the street. And I've heard the original, and I've heard other people remake it. But this particular marching band version of the song, I'm also obsessed with. And it was on the soundtrack of Girls Trip.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll check that out. I think you're going to love the lineup at Changeville this year if you get to hang out for the whole weekend, because we have a lot of brass and just cool artists in general.
Fantastic. I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, Ian, thanks so much for talking with us today. We're really looking forward to seeing you perform and hanging out at the festival.
I can't wait to be there and to meet you and perform and see all the other wonderful artists making change and hear some of the panels and everything. It'll be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks again to our guest, Ian Harvie. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Changeville podcast. Tickets are available to Changeville 2018, as are single show tickets if maybe you just want to see Ian. And you can get them at changeville.us. The Changeville podcast theme was written by Jason Shaw. Until next time, this is Brandon, signing out.